This morning we're going to talk about a little bit more about models, and then I'm going to go into scaffolding, and you'll see how easy it is that Rails generates a lot of the code that is very common across web applications. It's common to have a CRUD interface to a table in a database. So we need to be able to create a new record. We need to be able to read that record and display it on the screen. We need to be able to update it or edit that record, and then delete that record. So that's the CRUD, create, read, update, delete. And that's all done so often that Rails wrote these generators, like we generated the model, we generated our views. It lets us generate all of the code necessary to do CRUD for a table. All of the views, the controllers, the models, the migration, everything gets done with this one scaffolding command. So let's go ahead and I'll just start with that. I was going to play around with the model a little more, but let's get into the scaffolding. So since it's a generator, in RubyMine, we just run the generator under the tools, run Rails generator. And if we type scaffold, that's one of the generators that it allows us to do. Remember I showed if you don't do anything, there's a lot of different things that I can generate from the generator code. So scaffold is what I want. Not scaffold controller, but the scaffold. And if you look at the arguments that it requires, this is identical to the arguments that are required for what?
The model.
The model, okay? Because the model is what drives all of the views and the forms and everything, that all we have to specify in our scaffolding is the model itself. So I give it a model name, and then all of the column names and the type of data that's going to be stored in those columns in a key value pair across. Okay, so let's create one. I don't want to do products because you guys have to do that.
Why not?
Let's do. I had one this morning and I can't remember what it is. Yeah, my recipes. Let's do recipes. All right, recipes. And then the field and type. I need a bunch of these fields and types. So let's start out with the name of my recipe. What type of data is going to be stored in there? It's a string. I'm going to have a made by as a string. I might have the ingredients as a text field because I want to store a bunch of text in there. No, the square brackets means that this is optional. Okay, I have an optional field colon type for each of the columns that I want in my table. So I could just say model name, but it wouldn't give me much. I mean, it doesn't make sense too much. So last made, I think we had a date time, if you spell it right. We had an image. Oh, it serves, right? We have an image of which is going to be, we talked about this a little bit. We're going to store the image actually on the file system, not in the database. So what do I need here? A string, which will be like a URL to the actual image. And then I have a serves as a integer, right?
So when we do this, it's the same as creating the model. We don't include the ID or the
Right.
timestamps,
Right. Correct. The timestamps are going to be created automatically for me, and the ID, the auto increment not null unique column that Rails creates for us will create for us. All right. You'd probably do a float or a decimal for a price. I'm not going to do that because I'm not selling my recipes. Okay, I'll go along with that one. I'll say cost as a decimal.
But you don't have that in the table. How much it costs?
No, I know. I'm going to overwrite everything that I've created so far. It's going to destroy my existing recipe data.
What these ones, how different from your generator model?
Well, it will generate a lot more code, as you'll see in a minute. When we generated the model, all it gave us was that recipe.rb file, which is just the model and a connection to a table in the database. This will give us that, plus all the controller and all of the views to display the forms to create, read, update, and delete.
So if we've already done like the the model and we've already put some data into it, when we make this and we happen to use the same name, will it just override all that data?
It should. That's what I'm going to try here. It should be able to. It'll ask me if I want to overwrite everything, and it should overwrite the files for me.
If you look at the tooltip on force, it'll say
Yeah.
force it to overwrite files that already exist.
Yeah. So since this is one that I've already, I created a model already. I'm gonna check that and force it to rewrite files that I already have in the system.
And then you probably want to uncheck skip. That says skip files that already exist.
Probably want to do that, yes. I don't normally do the same model, so. All right, so those you won't have to deal with these. If you're going to start from scratch with a products model, you don't have to deal with forcing those. Yes.
So if you were doing this regularly, you would never have made the model. You never
No.
would have generated the model. You would have generated the scaffold.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we rarely just create a model. It is possible, but and there are some religious wars out there if you look in the Rails discussion boards about whether or not to even use the scaffolding. But in my opinion, especially as you're learning Rails, the scaffolding does a lot for you, but as long as you go in and you figure out what it's doing for you, which is what I'm going to teach you, it gives you a basis to start with. What is a scaffold in just non-Rails terms? What is a scaffold used for?
Something to hold up what you're building.
Right. So we build scaffolds around like a brick building, and it's used for the construction workers to walk around so they're not stomping on the building, and they're laying more bricks, and they build the scaffold up higher. They lay more bricks. When they're done with the building, what do? They pull the scaffolding out. So the scaffolding just gives us a place to start, and we're going to be modifying a lot of files and changing it to tweak it just the way we want it. Okay, so, but it gives us a good basic start for the entire application. And you'll see how easy this is when it creates it. Compared to PHP, you had to create every single form from scratch. I understand that we didn't use a framework, but that's, so let's do that. Let's see what it creates for us. So it's going to go through and tick-tock through a little bit, and it's going to create a bunch of files here for us. Any questions so far? Now, your book has a page that talks about all of the different column types for your database that you can have, like string, text, decimal. All of those are different column types, data types. And it tells you what that maps into if you're using a particular back-end database. So MySQL might map a float differently than SQL Server. They might map it into a different data type that they're used to. But Rails takes care of that for us. Yeah.
So using a model, like generating a model, would you use that on an instance where maybe you wanted to read a database that you're not writing to?
Yes, that would be one way to do that.
Like
Yes.
you're using it as a reference, not as its
Yeah.
control, like getting users out of a different database.
A different database, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be a good reason for that.
Okay.
All right, so we can see it removed this migration because I told it to force that. So that was the first migration we made when we generated the model. It created me a new migration. It created a new recipe.rb file, and it created some test pieces, created a controller, a recipes controller. Notice how I told it I wanted a recipe, and it says I'm going to control multiple recipes. So it pluralized that word for me automatically. That's automatic by Rails. And then it created all of these views for me: an index, edit, show, new, and a form partial. Notice the underscore means that's a partial. And we've got some more tests. It created me a helper file, and also the assets. So I have a SAS file, which we'll talk about later, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file that I can write JavaScript code specifically for this model in my database. All right, so let's go look at some of those files. Let's first look at the migration that it created. I created that this morning. This is the one, this create. I'm going to delete this, actually. This is the migration that was created by my scaffolding. And it's the same thing as when we created the model. So I have this create table method. And these are the columns in my database. Name, made by, ingredients, last made, image, serves, cost. And here is the timestamps that it's going to create for us, the created at and the updated at columns. Now, before, notice this just created the file. This did not actually create the table in the database. And we did that separately. We talked about why we did that separately, so that if I wanted to change something in here, I could modify it now before I commit it to the database.
Do validation?
No. We do validation in the model. Yes?
Okay, so if you created the model and named it exactly the same as your scaffold, right? Would you actually need to run the migration if the database matched exactly?
For an existing database?
Yeah. For instance, like
No.
if you built your model and then converted it to a scaffold using the exact same name and exact same column names and column types, wouldn't you not have to run?
Yeah, no, because
the
that
migration?
all this deals with is the database, so the table is already in the database, so you wouldn't have to do that.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So, but at this point, I can change format of this a little bit. I can move things around because I typed these in the wrong way. I'm going to actually move these just to make my database nicer, because these actually end up being in that column order. So name, serves, cost, made by. I might have all of this moved around just for my own purposes. I'm gonna make last made here. No, I'm gonna put that under made by. Normally, you don't have to do that. You type them out in the column order that you want. And in most databases, it doesn't really matter what the column order is. It's just people like to see it in a nice order. You know, that's all up to you.
I have one question.
Yep.
So if when you see it, you see some column you don't want to delete, so what will happen?
In a scaffolding situation, we don't want to do that. We would want to remove the scaffold and redo the scaffold. We'll talk about that in a little bit later, because not only did it create this table, it created all the views that we'll talk about in a second. Okay, so you'll see that if I want to add a column later on, I'm going to have to modify a bunch of files manually. So if you catch it right at the time you're making the scaffold and you say, oh, I forgot a field, I think it's easier to remove the scaffold completely, let it delete all the files, and start over, make a new scaffold, and add that field back in. Yes? No. Yeah, go ahead. There's a scaffold remove command.
Now, will that also remove like all the SQL and stuff from it, the tables and all that?
Yes.
I don't delete, I just regenerate and just.
So you were no, it won't delete the table. If you run,
It will delete the table. We'll talk about migrations tomorrow a little more, or next week probably. The migration here, when I execute this, it's going to actually create the table in the database. So if I've gone through and run the migration, the table is created. If I want to remove that and change that, I have to run the migration in a downward method, which we'll talk about, redo a migration, and it actually deletes the table. Doesn't delete the database, but that particular table associated with that migration. So I can move up and down through these migrations, and it will actually delete the data in the table.
So if the scaffolds were removed, the SQL and everything, why would you want to remove the scaffold again? You were talking earlier. That
Because, well, all right, we'll get to that right now before I run this. You guys are not seeing that. yet. So if I look at my recipes, for instance, here's a form that has all of the data. This was generated for my particular model. So it created the form fields for me. See these form label, form text field? It creates all of these for the data that I put in when I said to generate it. So if I now want to go back and add a field, I'd have to modify this file manually. And I'd have to modify all of these files manually. So in that case, if you catch it right away, I think it's simpler to destroy everything and start over again, because all of these files are generated based on those column tables, column names. Does that make sense? A little more sense?
So
All right.
So if you had data in the table,
It would be destroyed.
when you remove the
Yes.
scaffold,
Well, because it's going to do a drop table command. So the drop table, poof, it's gone. But that's why we're in our development mode here. And we don't care. I haven't even I put a couple of data rows in there, and they're going to be gone when I redo this, hopefully.
well, I was just curious, like if you were doing it and you had to be able to update the table, you had to add something to the table.
Right.
And
You
there's
can do-
thousands of records in there that
Right.
you don't want to lose.
Right. Then you would not do that. You would add another migration that essentially alters the table, existing table. It will run an alter table command, add column, all of that stuff. And then I would have to manually add the fields in here so I could edit it. You know, in that case, if I want to save the data, that's what I have to do. At some point, Rails can't figure that out for me and add stuff to a form that it's already generated.
Right.
That's too much work, too much effort to figure out. Okay, so let's look at some of these files. Actually, let's run it so you can see it first. How do I get that migration to force it to create the table in the database? Right, so I can say, I want to say run db migrate. I did a right click, or you can say tools, run rake task, db migrate. And that will execute that code and create the table in the database for me with this name, with all of these columns, with all of the right data types in each column. And it's clicking along, running. Any questions while that's running? Yes? Yeah, I could manually add this here. I could add another column here before I ran the migration. But again, if I'm doing a scaffolding, if I add a column here, I'm going to have to go into my form and add the data here, and I'm going to have to go in over here and do that. So this is what I was afraid of here, that my table already existed, and so it fails on that. It's not going to let me run that. So
You have to do a
I'm just going to delete this file. I'm going to delete my database since I didn't care what's in it anyway. And it's gone. And now I'm going to run the migration again. Normally you wouldn't have to do that. Now the database is gone. It should accept, it'll create a new file for me here, a development.SQLite3, I think it is. Any other questions while we're waiting again?
So if you wanted to update a scaffold, would it not be easier just to run the scaffold again with the updated column?
No, because, well, if you told it to override everything, yes, that would work. Sure. All right, so it did it. It found that there was no table already there. It created my table for me. And now I have a file called development.SQLite3 with only this migration in it. This only this one table. My schema now has all of this information. We talked about that last week. It has the two columns created at and updated at, as well as an ID, which it doesn't show here. Okay, while we're on that, RubyMine has a really cool feature. Under the View menu, you can say Show Model Dependency Diagram. And what this does is it looks at my code, my actual text, my schema, and it figures out that this is what my database should look like. Now I have this exam thing, but I'll delete that later. But This is my recipe table, and this looks a lot like SQL diagrams that you've seen. I've got my cost image, all my fields, and the data types that they have. And I can also come up here and say, show me the system database fields, which it thinks are the ID and the created at and updated at. Those are generated for me by Rails and modified for me by Rails. I don't have to think about those. But I can utilize the data in them. Yes?
Like these, so you have ID as like a primary key.
That's the primary key, exactly.
But you don't have the second key, like a full key. How I can do that?
Later, a couple weeks, we'll get to that. Yes. That has we can do that through model relationships, and a recipe might have, or a product might have many reviews associated with it, which is what you're going to build. So we can do one-to-many relationships. I can do many-to-many relationships and have all of those foreign keys, and Rails keeps track of that for me. Really nice. Does all the joins and stuff necessary. I don't have to worry about that. So anyway, that's a nice little feature. As you get a more complex file, and we have a foreign key in here, it'll draw a line to the other table and show me the other table, and it's pretty nice. All right, so I have it running now. Let's go and look at the routes file real fast to show you what it created for me. This is going to be gone. I'm going to delete that. This is the one line it added to my routes file. And what this does is it created resources is a method that says create all of these type of gets and posts and everything necessary for a CRUD system in Rails. So it actually generates, if I run the rake routes, this will show me all of the methods of how I can get to my table. And I might as well start this guy up. Okay, let's pause it. So here we go. This is the route, what Rails thinks are all of the routes that I have. And you have all of these page ones that we've created before. But then I have all of these recipe ones were created for me with this one line of code, resources, recipes. So it gives me a get on recipes, a post on recipes, which corresponds to 7 different methods in my recipes controller, which we'll talk about in a minute, maybe tomorrow. I've got an index. These are the 7 different methods that are required for a CRUD interface to my table. I've got an index, create, new, edit, show, update, delete, destroy, same thing. So these were all created by that one line of code. So let's go and try to get to my new recipes. So I said, go to my localhost /recipes, plural, means that it's going to look at my index page in my recipes controller. Remember that hash syntax here. But I have a problem because in my navigation, I have this recipes path here, which is wrong. That actually got destroyed because of the routes file here. So this is no longer here. I'm going to take these out completely and fix up my navigation to go to what method. If I look at my routes file, /recipes goes to what internal method was created for me for that. Recipes _ path or recipes _ URL. Remember that? So this column here on the far left is the variable or the method name for the path. So I have to go into my navigation file and fix that. That's in my shared partial. And instead of path recipes, page recipes path, it's now going to be just recipes path. So if I reload this now, I should be all happy. And there we go. Look at that. So this is my index method, which by default displays all of the columns. And I'm going to have to fix this up with some styling or something. But it displays all the columns of my database and each row for each record of my database. Now, I don't have any in my database. They got destroyed when I created this new migration. But it gives me a link here to a new recipe. So all of this was created. This code is in the views, which we'll look at in a minute. But if I click New Recipe, it comes and finds the partial that was created to have all of the fields necessary to fill in and create a new record for my recipes. Isn't that sweet? I didn't have to generate this by hand. It figured out that name was a string, so it gave me a text input box. It figured out that made by was a string, so it gave me a text input box. It figured out that index, I used the type text, so it's a text area field. So it figured that out. Last made was a date and time, so it came up with pull-down menus for all of the months and the days and the year, 4-digit years, going back 5 years and going forward 5 years, which we can modify that as well. And a date and a time, so I can choose this military time, minutes, hours, and minutes. Then the image was what type of field? It's a string, so I'm going to put a URL in here. What is this one? Serves. It's an integer, okay? And cost has a decimal in here. So I can start to fill this out. I can put Dave's ribs, made by Dave, pork, and this by default, what does that day look like? That's today. It defaulted to the current date and time, which is very nice. Although the time is UTC, so that's back in Greenwich Mean Time. So I want this to be 9 a.m., so I'm going to say 9:09. And there are ways to fix that as well. The image is going to be the file named, I actually copied one in here to show you. I created a babybackribs.jpg here. So I'm going to put that image name in here, babybackribs.jpg. It serves 8, and it costs $19.99. All right, when I hit the create recipe now, where is that data going to go? It goes to my controller, and all of that data then makes a path to the model to create a new entry, a new record in my database, and it comes to what we call the show page. This is the page, and notice how I even have a recipe was successfully created here.
Does it automatically do
that? It does that automatically as well. That's the Flash stuff. Yep, we'll show that in a second too. This gives me the name. This is the show page, or what we call the detail for this record. And I can make this look however I want, but this is by default. I can move stuff around, add some styling, etc. But it gives me that scaffolding.
And it does that show page on its own. You don't create it yourself.
Right.
Well, that's different from PHP.
A lot different. Now, if I hit back, it's going to go to the default index page. If I hit edit, this goes to the update. All right. Notice how it says update recipe down here instead. And it fills all the stuff in here. It's sticky. This is all the data from the database. I could add something, pork and BBQ sauce. And change some stuff, update the recipe, and it will go back to the show page. And I can see that it updated the database, actually stored stuff in the database. If I look at my console, my Rails web log, you can see back here the update command. This is the update SQL that got modified. The only column that it noticed that was different was ingredients. So it figured out a smart way. It didn't have to update every single field. It only updated my ingredients field. And at the same time, it modified my updated at column, which says that that record was modified. Isn't that sweet? One line of code, that generate code, did all of this for me. So now if I hit back, it's going to go to the index page, and it shows in columns, these are all of the data from my database. And it gives me this show, edit, and destroy, which is what I forced you guys to make in PHP.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? Look at that. And if I look at the URL, it now has a URL that says /recipes/1. If you look at the bottom down here, when I hover over that show, it says /recipes/1. So if I say show, it's going to use that ID. That's the ID of that record in my database. Go and pull all that information and go to my detail page. From the back here, if I go to edit, it will go and get the database, hit the database for the data, fill in my form so it's sticky, and lets me edit the data in place. I hit update, and it saves the data back to the database. And then I have a destroy method. Hopefully this will work. It comes up with an automatic, are you sure you want to delete this? This is a JavaScript confirm dialog for those that have had JavaScript. It should work in IE. Yeah. So if I hit OK, or let's hit cancel first. Obviously, cancel doesn't do anything. If I hit destroy, it's going to go through, delete the data from the database, and redisplay my index page. So that is gone. Isn't that sweet?
So how do you get?
How hard was that in PHP?
Very.
Weeks of coding.
Yes.
Weeks of coding.
Days. 2 days.
Yeah, but still, 2 minutes. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, but I can do it in
Where do
Greek
you
for
go
about
into?
10 minutes.
Where do you go in to change the display how it's
Oh, well,
everything together?
yeah, we'll get to that. That's all in the views,
Okay.
and it created those 5 different view files for me.
Oh, okay.
So I've got pork and BBQ sauce. I got to recreate my record now. It's going to be
Baby back ribs.
Baby back ribs.
baby back dash, yeah. Oh, it's already in here. Good. Serves 8. Cost is $19.99. Create the recipe. Now I've got my record created again.
In the future.
And if I created a new one, Dave's mac and cheese, made by Dave, ingredients,
Spelled cheese wrong.
noodles and cheese. Exactly, I would take a point out for that. Image is going to be mac cheese.jpg, serves 4, costs 20 cents.
I thought you were going to say $20. I was like,
PC
well, that's
cheese.
That's plenty of cheese.
All right, so now I've got a new record. When I hit back, it's going to display all of the records that I have in my database.
So if you actually had those images in your files, how do you get it to show those right there?
You guys are anxious to learn. That's good. That was where I was going to go. The image here is just displaying a JPEG, the string, right? To actually make that pull from the database and show the image, I have to modify this page. So I'm going to modify the show page for now. Exactly right. So the image, instead of displaying the name of the file, I want to display the actual image here. So to do that, the image is in my images folder. All I have to do is go to my view. These are the files that were created for me from the scaffolding. And the show page is the detail for one product or for one recipe. So here we go. This has this notice which is dealing with the flash. We'll talk about that later. So I come down here and I look at my image. Now this, remember that to get the data from the database, let's go back. It's too much to do. Well, let's just change it for now. This is a string representing the image that's in the database, right? So all I have to do is display an image tag instead, passing that string to that argument, to that method, right? So instead of displaying the string, I'm going to display an image tag with this as the source URL for it. Look at that. Is that sweet?
Set the all equal to the name?
Well, it does that automatically, yes. If I look at the source, see, those are my ribs right there, I'm sure. I stole this off the web, but anyway.
Official stock ribs.
Stock ribs, that's right. So if I look at my source code, you see that Rails, if I don't give it an alt, takes the name of the file as the alt tag, and the source is just that variable that I put in. It knows it's in my assets folder because it's a image tag, so it looks for it there under the images directory automatically. And I could size this if I wanted to. You know, obviously, I recommend not sizing images in the browser. Yeah. Isn't that great?
Those are your favorite
Those are
tags.
old. I know I use those. These guys are old school like me, I'm telling you. So that's the source. Obviously, I could change this and have a thumbnail or something like that of this image. Make it real crazy, right? So that's really big. I could use size tags to size it down, but is that ever recommended? No. Exactly. It still loads the 40 megabytes to get this big image, and then displays you 2K worth of data. I don't care. That's bad practice. So this is just HTML with some ERB inserted, and it generated this code for me automatically. Obviously, if you don't like the B tags, you can change that, make it look more of a style that you like. Put these in divs, but it gives you a place to start. It creates the links for me using the routes file that I have. So I have a recipes path that goes to the index page, etc. Yeah.
Do we have to have images for the assignment?
Yes. You do now that you asked.
It doesn't say so in the assignment.
I'll change that.
It says you need thumbnail and full size.
Yeah.
No, it says you need it in the database. It doesn't say you need it on the page.
I'll modify that just for you. All right, we're out of time today. Let me show you real quickly the controller, and then we're going to go through this in ad nauseum detail here to make sure you understand what all of these methods are. So if I go to the index page, that's the just /recipes. Notice it goes and gets a recipe.all, which is going to the model, getting all of the recipes, all of the records, storing it into what type of variable?
Recipes.
Which is what?
Oh, an instance.
An instance holding what? An array of recipe objects. So if I look at the view for that, you can see it lays it out in a table, and it does a recipes.each, and just lays out table cells for each one of these. Isn't that nice? This is very cool.
Wish it was that easy in PHP.
Yes. So that's enough for today. We'll do a lot more tomorrow.